Thank you, Malaprops.
Thank you, Malaprops.
Thank you, Malaprops and indie bookstores everywhere. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's so
Congratulations.
wonderful. Thank you very much. It's so, are you excited? Today's the big day.
Today is the big day.
Feel good?
I am, so far.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing this story to the world. And also thank you for giving me an excuse to actually wear a Yankees shirt to a book event.
Thank you for
And
representing.
my Snoopy baseball watch. So
I feel underdressed.
I'm all about the sports. In fact, Out at the Plate, fantastic. Was that your title?
Yes. How I got there is a story.
That's why we're here.
Do you want to know how I got there?
I do, because it's a fantastic.
That was not the
title.
original title of the book.
None of my books that their titles are never the original title.
Oh, thank God it's not just me.
Yeah, no.
No, that was not nearly the original.
Okay, what was the original title?
Extra Innings.
Like the, okay, yeah.
Because Dot lived to be 101.
Yeah.
And second, because she, all of her games, so many of them went to Extra Innings. It just seemed like it was the right title. But as you know, in the biz, there were too many books titled Extra Innings. And so the publisher—
You've got to get that SEO right.
Yes, got to do it, got to do it. So the publisher came back to me and said, pick another title. And my wife and I sat down and gave them 43 potential titles. Wow. Wait for it. We gave them 43 potential titles, and they came back with 6 different ones.
I knew that's where this
Other
was
than
going.
the 43. But then, no. I said, no, I don't like those 6. And we came up with, how many more? We came up with, I think, maybe 4 or 5 more. Yeah. Up on top of that, and Out at the Plate, thank God, was on that list.
Fantastic. So you guys did come up.
We
with
did name
Okay.
it. Yeah, we absolutely titled the book, but it takes a village.
It takes a village to title a book that people will find on Google and the salespeople will agree with. Yes.
But it's a great title.
It's
I
a
love it.
fantastic, the best title in the world. So it's always tempting to look at a story like this. And also you're hitting 2 of my favorite topics, World War II and sports. It may not be a great thing for a narrative nonfiction writer to say, but I prefer sports to World War II by a long shot. Not my whole life. Oh yeah. And the reason I like sports is because it can, especially for women, is because it can play such a huge role in the lives of girls and women. And it also is a fantastic metaphor in all of life. It would be tempting to call this a sports biography, but I'd like to say this sports biography is neither about sports, nor is it really just a biography.
Right.
Discuss.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? So, and that's truly how I feel about this book. It's so much more
I
than
love
that.
that you feel like that about this book. I hope that everybody feels that way about this book. When I was writing it, first, of course, I had to sit down and figure out the lens for the story. How was I going to tell Dot's story? Was I going to make it a straightforward biography? Notice I didn't say straightforward biography.
Not a straight biography.
Not a straight biography, but a straightforward biography in which, it was just Dot. Certainly I had plenty of material to do that, but to understand Dot and to make her come to life, for me, you really had to understand our friendship and our relationship, because the way she told the story, she told it to me because of our friendship and because of the way we dealt with each other, which was very straightforward. And again, that word. Straightforward. Direct. Ooh, good
Direct.
I like that. It was very direct, and it was a lot of give and take, a lot of back and forth, a little, she liked me because I was feisty, and I reminded her of her partner, Ricky. She always said I reminded her of Ricky, which was true, because I just push back. But I really felt that to make her come off the page, it wasn't enough just to have her words. You had to have context for her words. And then I started thinking about it, and I thought, this is really kind of a cross between Tuesdays with Morrie, Mitch Albom, and Unbroken. It's sort of a cross between those 2 very different style books, but I really felt like it worked. And that way you could hear Dot in her own words, and it would be like sitting in the living room like I was having this conversation with Dot, because that's who Dot was. She was very direct, very unpretentious and down home. Tell it like it is, unvarnished truth. You're gonna like it, you're not gonna like it. She didn't care. She really didn't. And so she would just tell it like, and I wanted to draw the reader into our living room, into our conversations, and make it part of that. And so that was different. And the more I listened to Dot over the course of a dozen years, talking to her, the more I realized that this, and all the stories that she had were going to be lost to time. They were going to be lost to history.
Yeah.
Because these aren't the kinds of things that you can Google. It's not the kind of things you can go to an archive and find out.
Nope.
These were personalized stories, Dot's lived experiences, and you really needed to live them with her, through her. And the only way to do that was to live them as I lived them, with her.
She
With
becomes
her.
like a guide through a moment in history. She becomes like a guide through this actual segment of women's history, World War II, sports history, women who were not allowed, men who were not allowed to be who they were from a sexuality standpoint. And she just takes the reader through that because you allowed her to do that. How you talked about her being direct.
Mhm.
You guys met back in 2010, right? She wasn't necessarily totally warm and fuzzy with you when she first met you. So talk a little bit about that, because I think there is such a wonderful intimacy to this book that it makes it just so compelling. And you really do feel like you're sitting on the couch in the living room listening to you guys chat. So I kind of want to talk about how you got there, because you're touching on a lot of very, very delicate stuff in this book. But when you first met her, she was a little bit like,
She thought I wanted
that.
something from her.
Yeah.
I have no idea what she thought I wanted from her. Honestly, she never really came out and told me, because I would ask her years later, like, Dot, what did you think I was looking for?
Mhm.
I met Dot because I was doing an internet television show, and I really wanted to it was about powerful women, sort of a cross between Ellen DeGeneres and 60 Minutes, if you can imagine such a thing. I know, it makes no sense at all, but that's what it was. And it always featured.
I'd watch that.
Yeah, well, I'd watch it too.
I
I did, so, but it always featured, I always wanted to put front and center strong women, powerful women, and particularly, women who were diverse. And in the sense, they were mostly LGBTQ. And Dot and her pitcher, Billy Harris, who broke the color barrier.
Another fascinating, there's
another
so many
amazing
facets. That's
story.
the thing. This is about Dot Wilkinson. This is about an amazing array of incredible people. It's like, she did what? So
What?
yeah.
Yeah. So Billy, she broke the color barrier for women at about the same time that Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. But, Dot and Billy had been friends for 60 years when I met them, 60 years of friendship. And they were battery mates. So, Billy pitched, Dot caught, and I knew Billy. And I said, Billy, I really want to interview the two of you together, you and Dot. I really think that'll be a powerful segment. Can we do it?
Now you had met Billy working on the other project, yes?
No, I had met Billy. I originally met Billy at a classic WNBA game, Phoenix
Cool.
Mercury.
All right.
When somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, you need to meet her. And it was Billy. And I'm like, well, of course I need to meet her. I knew who she was, and so I met Billy that way. And then we became friends. And, and then I started learning more about the story, and I got so fascinated by Billy's story. That's just a whole other thing. So
Next book.
yeah.
61, book number 61.
Yes, maybe 62. So in any event, I really felt like their dynamic together was so powerful that it would be really interesting to probe that. And I said, Billy, can you get Dot? Because I'd never met her, And Billy said, sure, but Billy's very quiet and very East Texas, and very, she's got like a drawl. And everything Billy says, you want to lean forward to hear her say it, right? Because that's the kind of person she is. And for the longest time, I didn't hear back from her. Billy, what about that interview we were going to do? And she said, well, eventually she told me, she said, well, honestly, I can't get her to do it. She won't do it. What do you mean she won't do it? You want something from her. I'm like, an interview?
I do.
Really? No. And I said, well, I don't want anything. I just want to talk to the two of you. And finally, eventually, Dot gave in. And it was so nerve-wracking to get there that day and pick them up at Dot's house and do all of that. And I brought a peace offering, right? So I brought a peace offering to Dot. And that's how it started, right? I gave her a book of mine called Eyes on the Stars, which is a World War II era historical fiction book about the women Air Force service pilots. I thought it might appeal to her because it was her generation. Break the ice.
Great. You're bringing me right to my next question. I love this. Keep going.
You want me to
Oh, I
stop
want,
now?
no,
You
I
want
want
the
you to keep
question
going.
there?
No, you might actually just get there. Yeah.
Now I feel pressure. I'm nervous. So anyway, so 2 days after I did the interview and I gave Dot her book, I signed it, I gave it to her, I walked away. I thought, well, that's the end of that. I'll never hear from her again. And 2 days later, my home phone, when I had a home phone, which I don't anymore, thank God. But when I did, my phone rang and there's no preamble, there's no nothing, you wrote about my friends. Just like that. I mean, just like that. I did not. I did no such thing. Yes, you did. Those were my friends who flew those planes. You wrote about my friends. I want to know how you knew to write about my friends. Oh my God, I felt like I was being attacked. It's like, I was offended by that. I mean, it's fiction. I made it up. I had met some of the women Air Force service pilots. Yes. I had interviewed them. Yes. But none of those characters were based on those women. Trust me. And, I said, I didn't, Dot, I didn't. Well, come to lunch with me and we're going to talk about it. Okay, I guess this is a command performance. So 2 days later, I had lunch with Dot.
So what I love about this, and that's one of my favorite stories in the book, is getting from that to her allowing you deeply into, not just to do this book, but into her life.
Yeah.
As a writer, as a journalist, as a storyteller. That's incredibly important to be able to build that trust, but you can't come across as seeming as though I'm building my trust with you now. This is how I'm going to do it. How did that kind of evolve? Was there ever a time where you felt like, oh, this has clicked now? She's gonna talk to me, or was it kind of a gradual, you could feel her opening up?
Well, interestingly enough, in my non-journalist capacity at that moment, I wasn't looking for the story, to write the story. I never intended to write this book. Quite honestly, I never thought I would. I never intended to write the book. I just, the very first thing she showed me, because her house was like a museum, Dot kept everything, every artifact, everything. She had it. You'd call her a hoarder, but she would say it was just stuff. And I'm like, this is history, because I'm a history geek. This is history. And Dot would say, no, it's stuff, and there's her Hall of Fame bat, and there's, her Hall of Fame glove, and this, it's her plaque, and it's ridiculous what's in the house, and her chest protector and her mitt and her, all of it. And we would argue about that. But, she the second time I came to her house, she pulled out her scrapbook. Finally, I was allowed to see something, and the second she pulled out that scrapbook, I was hooked for life. That was it, because she had all the old newspaper articles from back in the day. And the first one I saw was a picture of Dot in 1938 on the top of Radio City Music Hall in New York City with the Rockettes and her teammates. I'm going, Dot, you met the Rockettes. Well, yeah, in 1938. Well, yeah. Why? How did that happen? And then she's explaining this whole story to me about playing in Madison Square Garden in 1938, where 26,000 people over 2 nights came to see their games. women's softball, Madison Square Garden, 1938. And she met, the world heavyweight champion, Jack Dempsey,
Jack
had
Dempsey,
a hamburger with him across the street and all this stuff. And that was it. I mean, I was hooked. And I didn't start asking her questions because I was thinking about telling her story. I simply started asking her questions because it was jaw-dropping to me, the things that had happened in her life. And I just wanted to know more and more and more. And it was just, it sort of snowballed from that curiosity. And in there, as you know, how much should I give away?
No, this is,
What you think?
it's, no, you're doing fine.
Okay.
You're doing fine.
Stop me, just.
I will, no, I will,
bump,
yeah.
do the New York bump me in the head.
Yeah,
'cause I'll
absolutely.
understand
got a
that if I
good-
go
yeah,
too far.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I got my Yankee shirt on.
But
I'll give you a snack.
Don't leave a crease.
I
I'm
won't.
just saying. Don't leave a crease. Okay, so she, when I met Dot, her partner of 48 years, Estelle Ricky Cato, another Hall of Famer, was gravely ill. She was on hospice in their living. Well, she wasn't in their living room at that time, because when I first met Dot, she was in the hospital. Ricky was in the hospital. Dot never went to the hospital a day in her life until the last week of her life, by the way. But 101, she died at 101 and never ever went to the hospital. She wasn't born in a hospital. But I met Ricky, and it was a very powerful meeting toward the very end of her life. And I really felt like Ricky was handing Dot off to me. Take care of her. Remind her of who she is.
That's
Remind her of
that's
who
really
she
interesting,
is.
because all these things that you're saying always makes me want to, do you think there's something about that, being a woman from that generation, that they tend to devalue their own achievements? Like, oh, well, yeah, sure, I was hanging out with the Rockettes and Jack Dempsey. Is there something about that time and place? Did you see that in some of the other women you encountered and interviewed, that they just didn't seem to kind of really own the magnificence of what they had actually not just accomplished, but also inspired other people to accomplish?
Right. And that's great. And you bring up a fabulous point. And the point is, yes, I mean, I think that she would tell you all she cared about was playing ball.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, that was seriously true. She only cared about playing ball. And, so for her, there was nothing else. And it didn't matter. And, all of the things that they did and the way that they did it didn't seem like a big deal to her, just as long as she got to play ball. And that was all she cared about. She didn't want to get paid, right? She didn't want to get paid. She just wanted, by golly, to play ball. And anything that got in the way of her playing ball, nothing was going to get in the
Which is
way
why
of
she
her
was
playing
so
ball.
successful.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
she was the greatest catcher, ever. And that's the other thing that I love about this. I said before, this is neither sports nor is it just a biography. You can take softball out and put in, I wanted to play piano, I wanted to do this, I wanted to do that. And you can take the same kind of message, inspiration from her story in any of those situations. People who were just laser focused and did something that meant so much to them. She had a very humble upbringing. To what extent do you think growing up in the Depression kind of shaped who she was?
Her childhood, I think, shaped pretty much everything about her life. Her parents were such an interesting story. They came from England. They were middle class in England, and they picked up and moved to Phoenix, Arizona, at a time when Phoenix was nothing. I mean, there was nothing in Phoenix. It was dirt roads, and they came because her mom's brother had come before them, and so they
From England to Phoenix.
England to Phoenix.
How does that happen?
I don't know.
I mean,
The air is-
you're crossing an awful lot of the United States before
I
you get
know.
to Phoenix.
I
Phoenix,
don't know.
St. Louis, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I asked Dot that many times. She said, well, I guess the air was good. And I'm thinking, not in Phoenix when I lived there. That's a whole other story. But yeah, so her dad purchased 10 acres in Phoenix, which at the time was, just an open field, essentially, with nothing, dirt, and started a farm. He knew nothing about farming. Her mother had never didn't know how to cook. She had to learn to make a fire and cook over the fire and do all that stuff. Didn't know any of that. It was so ridiculously humble. And they never made enough on the farm to support themselves, except for, they sustained themselves with the farming. That was it. It's not like they sold a lot of things to other people or anything. They just made what they could do. And so they were so poor. How poor were they? They were so poor. Sorry, I just realized.
No, you gotta go. Yeah.
They were so poor that that they didn't have running water in the house. So Dot was always embarrassed about that. They never had running water. They never had, 2 nickels to rub together, as they say. And yet they were always happy. They killed their chickens for dinner and managed to get by. And her mother made ice cream in the front yard every day. And
With the salt.
all of it.
Sure.
Yeah. And that was the way Dot started her life. And she always sort of lived humbly, even when she didn't have to later on. That was just who she was.
And this probably contributes to her humility around her incredible achievements in multiple sports, actually, not just
True.
softball.
True.
We'll let you all read about that. So talk a little bit about her as a player, because you did not want to cross Dot on the diamond.
No, I might have done it, but I'd been stupid to do it, and everybody who tried it found out how stupid they were to do it. I mean, Dot would just as soon knock you on your butt as look at you. And that was her reputation, and it was really well deserved. I mean, she didn't take any prisoners at all. And Larry
kicking dirt and yelling at umps and the whole.
She'd grab them by the shirt collar and shake them and she was horrible. She was horrible. As I would not have wanted to be anywhere near her unless she was my teammate, in which case, okay, go. You do that. But she had a very bad temper, and she was very short and stocky. She's 5'3" and built like a truck. Really, you can see her legs on the back of the book cover. And so Dot, Larry Walker, who coached the A1 Queens, which was their main rival, would say all the time, don't slide at home. You run over her. You run over her. And Dot's like, yeah, I don't think so. Not today. You can hold my beer. I'm busy. And she would just knock him to the ground and just move on. It's like nobody scored on Dot because nobody could get past her. And later in life, I talked to her every night. Every night I talked to Dot for a dozen years. And no matter where in the world I was or whether I had COVID or not, I talked to Dot. But she, later in life would complain to me. She would watch the Arizona Diamondbacks because that was her team.
Sure.
Go D-backs tonight for Dot. And she would complain to me that the catchers were wussy now because they didn't block the plate. Every night I get this. It's like, he didn't block the plate. She's watching the game while she's talking. He didn't block the plate. These guys, they're paying them all that money. They never paid me anything, and I'd have blocked that plate. Like, you'd still be blocking the plate if they let you down.
Well, in 1960, the Sports Illustrated called her the female Yogi Berra.
Yeah.
And which is amazing. But when I read that, I was like, why do the amazing accomplishments of women always have to be framed in comparison to what a man did?
It just happened to Simone Biles. Did you see
it?
That
Happens all the time. Oh, did it really?
Yes.
Who?
Yes. What they called her the next some male figure.
Sure.
And she corrected them. Bless her.
God.
She came back and she said, no, I'm the first Simone Biles.
Yeah.
And she's, yes,
yay.
you go, because she's right.
I love that.
You're right, but they always frame it in
right.
those terms.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you look back, and I know you do a lot of research in the same period, the sexism in the newspaper articles,
Oh yeah.
the misogyny is just breathtaking.
Yeah.
It's just breathtaking. The comely Miss Wilkinson did this or that.
Well, and this whole league,
Yeah.
the league handbook
For a league of their own, for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball.
for the All-American Girls Professional
did not
Baseball
play in.
League, which she, yes,
Yes.
we're talking about an era where it was play like a man,
Mhm.
look like a lady.
Yes.
How the length of you had to play in a skirt, which is one of the reasons she was like, I'm not doing that.
No.
Your nails, your lipstick, because women should always have, what was it? You should always have comely lips or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's astounding to look at. And yet Dot manages to become the greatest while taking people out at the plate.
Yeah.
In a certain sense, do you feel as though sports, not just then, I would almost argue now as well, is kind of a safe space for women to just be whatever kind of woman they want to be? I mean, because I used to cover sports. Soccer's my thing. I mean, I love my Yankees, but soccer's my thing. And the fights that still go on for women, successful, I mean, world champion women, to still get the respect that they deserve. I mean, that's happening in the 21st century. But do you feel like back then, even more, being able to be on the diamond, do your thing, was a place where you could be the kind of person, not the kind of woman you wanted to be, you could be the kind of person you wanted to be? Did she find it freeing? Did she ever talk about
it? It was freeing for her, and it was a safe space, you know, for women back then. It was a safe space because you could, as you say, be yourself and just go all out and not have anybody criticize you for it, although they got criticized plenty for, you know, as aggressive as they were at playing ball. And it's like, oh, they play like a man, like it's like that's an insult. And I said, well,
people kept showing up.
People should tell them they play like a girl. You know, back in that day, as you know, these women were so good. How good were they? They were so good.
Come on, give me a chance.
I'm sorry. My timing's off. They were good enough that they actually made a decision at the parks to have them be the top bill and the men be the bottom bill. In other words, the men had to play first so that they could get their butts in the seat for the men's games, because it's the only way they could make them come to the men's games. They were there to see the women. 25,000 people in the stands to go see the women play. That's what it was, which is astounding now if you think about it. I mean, think about that happening today. Although there were 55,000 people the other day to watch Caitlin Clark and the University of Iowa basketball team play on an outdoor court. There you go. But yes, it was freeing for them. It was different. You know, I've talked to some kids of women who played then, and they never really knew what their moms did. You know, they didn't talk about it. They just went out and did it. And then they,
That's
you know,
that
then they
World War II generation
then they had
thing.
kids.
Yeah.
The same thing with the women Air Force service pilots.
Yep,
Same
yep.
thing with the
The
girls of Atomic City.
Exactly.
The same with the Calutron girls. Same
Yeah,
thing over and over again. It's just that generation,
Mhm.
you know, where you didn't brag about what you did. You just went about your business and then, you know, did something else, whatever it was.
Going back to the idea of a safe space, it wasn't completely safe for anyone who was on the LGBTQ spectrum.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about that, because there was somebody, I forget who said it in the book. They said the number of women who were playing softball, and they said probably this percentage were gay.
Mhm.
But that was still not something that they could be, even though people had relationships, it was not something they could be, you know, terribly open about.
No, you wouldn't be open
Right.
back then. Hell, you weren't open when I was
Right.
coming up.
She
But-
actually advised, because there were players
Mhm.
who, there were others, but there were certain bars and certain clubs and all that sort of stuff. But she was one of the people who said, don't
Ever go to a gay bar. She would never, you know, for a long time, Dot managed the team in the late 40s and then later in the 50s and 60s. And Dot would tell her players, don't you ever go into a gay bar, don't you dare. And when they created, because it wasn't, you didn't want to get caught there. It wasn't safe, as you know, it wasn't safe to be a lesbian then. It wasn't safe to be in the LGBTQ spectrum at all. At the time, they would go to straight bars and dance with each other because nobody ever thought anything of women dancing together.
Right.
But in 1950, when they created Rambler Field, she and the manager, Fort Hoffman at the time, created their own field. They created a clubhouse, you know, around the corner within the confines of the stadium, so that they would have a safe space to dance and be themselves. You know, they always found each other. Those who were those who were lesbian, they always found each other. They knew who each other was, but you never talked about it. You never, Dot, in fact, of all the historical books I've read, Dot was the only woman of her generation ever willing to tell me about what it was like to be on the LGBTQ scale at that time. Only woman to tell me about it. Nobody else would open up about it. That tells you how closely guarded that was and how dangerous they thought it was to be out. I mean, you would have gotten thrown in jail. You could be either a teacher, you could be a secretary, you could work in a department store, but you couldn't do pretty much anything else. And, you know, if you were on, that was if you were a woman, right? And if you were a lesbian on top of that, with no man to, you know, shield you
To buffer, yeah.
to buffer you, or to give you cover, or to, I don't know, provide a living for you, what were you going to do? Something that's not in the book, but it's very true. Kay Rich, who is another Hall of Fame player, fabulous player, told me personally, she was a teacher, but Kay told me that she was a basketball referee at the time, and this was back in the late 40s. And she was in school still, she was in college at the time, and her coach found out that she was playing softball, or I mean, her PE teacher, whoever it was, found out she was playing softball and said, "You can't play softball. If you play softball, you are what we think you are, a lesbian, and therefore, you know, you're going to lose your teaching certification. You're going to lose your coaching certification." Kay continued to play softball, and she did not lose her teaching certification, but she did lose her basketball referee certification because she played softball, because softball players clearly must have been lesbian, must have been lesbian.
Unbelievable.
It's crazy.
You talk about people finding each other, and Dot certainly found someone in Ricky. Not her first relationship, but she and Ricky, I talked about how like your initial interaction with Dot was a little, there was a feistiness there. She and Ricky
Together,
Ricky played for the Lionettes. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
Together they were such trouble. Well,
but they battled on the diamond. Yeah.
It was no, as Dot would readily say, there are no friends on the ball field. I don't care who it is, there are no friends on the ball field. And there was a time long before they were together, that they were definitely not friends. You know, there was an instance where Dot had hit a double, and there was an error in the outfield, so she'd run, the Ramblers were playing the Lionettes, and so she'd already passed first, she'd already gone to second. Ricky was playing, I think she was playing shortstop at the time, maybe second base. She was playing second base at the time. And as Dot rounded second, Ricky jumped on her back, literally jumped on her back, and held her up so she couldn't go to third base on the error. And
this is why you couldn't wear a skirt.
No. Well, they were playing, you know, they were wearing shorts, but still. But so Ricky's on, picture this, Ricky is on Dot's back, and Dot is running anyway and pounding on her back, going, "Get off me, USOB, get off me." And everybody in the stands can hear her going, "Get off me, I'm gonna kick your, when you get off, I'm gonna." The ump didn't throw either one of them out of the game. They didn't give Dot home plate, which she thought she should have gotten, but she was safe at third. But she should have gotten home plate, and they didn't give her home plate. And she argued about that. But you know, I mean, years later, not very long later, they ended up together. And this is just, but their whole relationship, I gotta tell you, their whole relationship was like this. They were just, you know, what a pair. I'm glad that I didn't have to get in the middle of any of that. Let me just say, it wouldn't have been safe. I'd have been wearing the chest protector and the mask.
Oh yeah, I would not want to be an ump at a game that they were playing at. But this turns into a nearly 50-year amazing relationship. And yet, despite how times change and how time moves on, Dot still did not come out publicly until Ricky was gone. Was that something that surprised you?
No.
Okay.
No, you know, because as I said, women of that era who were lesbians, wasn't safe to come out. You knew not to come out. It wasn't that people didn't know. It's just you didn't talk about it. It wasn't what you talked about. You just hid, and they were so used to hiding in plain sight. When she and Ricky were business partners, they were partners in life. They did everything together. And I would say, Dot, what did people think you were? You know, two women living together and running a business together, a multi-million-dollar business together. What did they think you were? Well, we were just partners in every way. And we never told people we weren't, but we never told people we were. And that was just the way you did it. That was just the way it was done. But when Ricky passed away in 2011, in January 2011, Dot took out the obituary and showed me. And in it, it says, survived by her longtime companion. And I said, Dot. She said, yep, I came out. She's
The 21st century.
21st century. She's, in her 80s, and she came out. And I said, well, why now, after all this? And she said, because I'll be damned if I'm going to bury that woman and not have people know what she meant to me. I wasn't going to do it. And she sat her whole family down. She had great nieces and nephews and great greats and all that. And she sat the great nieces, hi to them because they're watching. She sat them down and she told them, this is how it is. This is who Ricky was to me. And they're all like, yeah, we knew that. Well, why didn't you say so? Well, you didn't say so. So we didn't say so. So nobody said so. We're saying so now. Okay.
Everybody say it.
Everybody say it with me.
And there's so much that's real. I mean, there's just so much that's relevant about this story in so many different arenas. To you, as someone who's so involved in their lives,
Right.
Not just as someone who was writing a book. What about Dot and the way she brings people into this world resonates today in the 21st century for you?
For me, the lesson Dot taught me, the lesson of Dot's life, and she would tell you the same thing. The lesson of her life, and she shared it with me on many occasions because she wanted to make sure I got the point, and she thought I was a little dense, apparently. Love you, Dot. Truly, don't get me with the baseball bat, okay?
I was going to say, yeah.
She would say it wasn't about the games. It wasn't about the ball. It wasn't about what you accomplished on the field. It was about your relationships. This is what matters in life. This is all there is what you have, your relationships. That's what matters. Hold on to those relationships, nurture those relationships, pay attention to those relationships, forget about everything else. That's what matters. And for all her life, after softball, as fierce as she was, and she was fierce on the field, for the rest of her life, she remained great friends, with her teammates, with her opponents who became her friends. It all circled around, and they all took care of each other later in life. All those who didn't have someone to take care of them, they were lesbians, many of them. They took care of each other. That's what they did for each other. And that was her greatest lesson, was just pay attention to your relationships, mind them, and don't let anything come before that.
She was certainly, what I came away from was, this is somebody who, despite all of the challenges, figured out a way to live her own truth the way she wanted to, on her terms. It's quite remarkable, which is why, I'll say again, this is, doesn't matter if you've ever watched a game of softball or baseball or any sports. Yeah, I'm married to someone who could care less about any, yes, Joe, who could care less about any sports at all. But this is the kind of story that really is, it's about kind of living life on your own terms, no matter what life has to throw at you. And so for that reason, it's just get the book. I'm getting, that's right. It's her 61st book. You got to get it. And so we are getting to the time for questions. Yes, Patricia,
Yes.
how do you want to do this? Do you want to do here
600
first?
questions.
Oh, we got all night. Don't we?
We got all night. We've got plenty of time, right? A question from the virtual audience about your documentary, Extra Innings. And the question from Marcia is, where can we see this documentary?
Excellent question. I did not know that. Why not?
Because, and I'll tell you why, when I set out to make that documentary, it was because I realized Dot was 92 at the time. It was 2014. And I realized that if I didn't get her on tape, we would lose these stories
Sure.
for sure. And she hadn't asked me at that time to write her biography yet. That didn't come till 2018. And I thought, I have to capture this in her voice because there's nobody left to tell the story. I mean, I was watching her friends, who became my friends, pass away one after the other after the other. They were all of a certain age. And I really felt like I have to get Dot on tape now because we'll lose this forever if I don't get her in her own words. And so I did. I sat her down in front of a live audience at the Phoenix Public Library for 2 hours. I made her sit there. Dot loved a crowd. She pretended she didn't, but we're going to give her a standing ovation personally. And I'm going to watch you on at the end of this. But she sat down and I asked her all the questions I knew. I knew the stories and I wanted her to share those with people. But the problem with Dot was her recollection was incredible, right on, spot on. But there were a few things that she got wrong, timing wise. She was wrong. And it would have been inaccurate. There were pieces of it that would be inaccurate. As I researched the book, I didn't realize it until I really started researching this book. And I started looking into the dates and the timeframes. And I was telling Patricia earlier, it took me 3 years to find one fact. You can appreciate this.
Yes, I can.
It took me 3 years to find out. Dot always told me that she went to the very first World Championships, that the Ramblers went to the very first World Championships.
Yeah.
No, they did
And when
not.
when you're talking to people for whom that is just a memory for whatever reason that
Yeah.
has been burnt into their brain,
Yeah.
you can show them as much proof as you want, and they'll be like, no, 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 that's not the way.
That's
That's
not
not
how
the way
it
it happened.
happened. Yeah,
What do you
she-
think finally made her come around and say, okay, I'll do a book?
She was thinking about her family, and she wanted her family to know more about her. She honestly, talk about humility. She thought that this was just going to be a little thing that I put together,
pamphlet, yeah.
with glue for her by
Staples.
myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm so handy. I'm so crafty. Not for her family. That's why she wanted it. She wanted, to leave them with something. And
Sort of.
that's what she thought this was going to be. And when I handed her, an early copy of this book on her 100th birthday, I had it handed to her, called Extra Innings, because I hadn't yet had to go through
God,
57
57, yeah, titles.
titles. I found a way to get one, to make one for her, and I had it handed to her on her 100th birthday. And she was so proud of that thing, and she showed it to her family all the time. They would come over and she'd say, here, read this or whatever it is. But the documentary was no longer factually accurate. Once
Okay.
I knew what I knew, I couldn't unknow it.
Sure.
So what I've done, I went back through the documentary not very long ago. I went back through the whole thing and I pulled out all of the great stories that were correct,
Mhm.
that she told. I pulled them all out and I've made them into video clips. So I have it all. And her family nicely handed me, after Dot passed, all these little 8mm reels of them.
Wow.
So I've been able to go through new footage of Dot and her teammates and her family. It's really historic stuff that you don't see anyplace else. And at some point, maybe, if I've got nothing to do, write a 63rd.
Yeah,
book
you're
or-
never doing anything.
Right.
All your spare
I'll
time.
put it back together
Yeah.
better,
Mhm.
more accurate. Now that I know what I know, I can't unknow it.
Yep.
And, I can't have this beautiful book, in conflict
No, of course not.
with what she says.
But it sounds like you have plenty to make it happen.
I think I do.
Yeah, so you will get to see the documentary. You
No.
just have to wait.
Don't promise them
You have to
that.
wait. You have to hold her to it.
She's gonna make it.
You've got, it's happening, it's on. Which, before we forget, how can people hear your news, follow you, make sure they know about not just this book, upcoming books, upcoming events, all that sort of stuff?
Oh, rock. I have a website. It's www.lynnames.com. You can subscribe. There's a little subscriber thing at the bottom. I'm even worse than you are great. I mean, you do the little nut graph thing and it's just enough, but not too much news. I love that. I'm not that good. I'm not that consistent. I'm not that consistent. But when I have something to tell you, I will share it with you
There you go.
via, an email from that link. So if you want to subscribe, go to the bottom of the website and it says subscribe here. And I don't know, subscribe.
There you go. All right. Do we want to take one from here? Are we going to go back and forth? How do you,
Yes,
you tell us.
Yes, please, is there a question?
Anyone
from
here?
the live audience?
Make something up. I do it all the time, but not when I'm writing nonfiction.
That's right.
Carol?
So I know we've talked about this before. The movie,
Mhm,
A League of Their Own,
mhm.
Sure.
was not based on this particular
Play.
play.
Right.
As much as you would like to think Gina Davis
Yeah.
As much as she would have liked to have been
Yeah.
Gina Davis. Yeah, no, you are correct. You win the prize. That's true. Everybody thinks that Dot was the catcher played by Gina Davis, Dottie Hinson in the movie, because she's named Dottie, first of all. And second of all, some of her characteristics are kind of Dot-like. That's just true. And I have from that documentary, I have the clip of Dot saying, I got asked that question. I do my best Dot imitation. I got asked that question so often. After a while, I just say, okay.
Do you
it
guys
wasn't-
ever just sit around and watch that movie so
No.
she could get mad?
No, I don't want to be sitting that close if she got that mad. She still had an arm. No, but she's sitting down.
Yes.
It's like, I'm over here,
I'm
but
over
she couldn't hit me. She was very accurate. But she was not. They came and they asked her if she wanted to, would she please help them with the movie? And Dot said, yeah, I don't think so. Just like she told Philip Wrigley when he came to give her a contract for that league. No, I don't think so. And why? Because she didn't like that they whitewashed the league, that they made it so that these women went to charm school and they wore skirts and they were trying their hardest to make them seem like anything but lesbians. And probably about, I would say conservatively, 65 or 70% of the players in that league were lesbians, but nobody was supposed to know that. They had to wear their lipstick, they had to wear dresses when they went out. That wasn't for Dot. She wore Levi's on the road. And, she wore lipstick because that was the era, but she didn't want to be told, don't act gay.
Yeah.
She really didn't want to be told what to do, even though it wasn't an obvious thing. So she turned them down for their country. And I'll tell you, you don't know this because it's not in the book, because I didn't find it out. Very
That's what
recently,
conversations of like this are for. Yeah.
Dot always told me, maybe I did with that. It's been a while since I wrote this. Dot told me very specifically that she still had her unsigned contract from Philip Wrigley for a league of their own, for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And Dot and I, for 12 years, looked for that contract. Everywhere in that house, everywhere we looked for that contract and we never found it. The two of us
Wow.
looking together never found it. And then just a week ago, I think, Missy, if you are out there, I love you. Dot's great.
I was going to say, didn't the
niece.
greats go looking for it? Yeah.
I sent them, do you have this piece of paper? I want this piece of paper. And lo and behold, they found two letters, not the actual contract, but the letter offering the contract, the whole letter, dated April 18th, 1943. Spring training for the very first season of that league started on May 17th. In the letter, it says, you must get back to us by May 5th, and we're never going to make this offer to you again for this kind of money, young lady. So you really should take this because it's good for you. A guy says a guy. And, Dot's like, yeah, what do you think about it? No, I don't think so. But I don't have the contract, but I have the letter. And then there's a subsequent letter that I didn't know anything about, that she was given a similar offer from a different pro league in Chicago, from a team called the Chicago Bluebirds. I knew the team, but I never knew that Dot had been offered a contract. That one was dated 1944. I have, thanks to Missy, a great scan of these things now.
See, I'm seeing already, like in the documentary, you're going to be scanning over the letters. And
You've committed me to this
showing
thing
that-
now.
Sorry, whatever.
Do you want to direct it? Please.
That's actually very tempting.
Yeah.
It's just such a great story. I don't want you see how we are. I mean,
Yes,
we'll just
lovely.
so
Right.
yeah.
Any surprises that you learned about Dot or the game or
It's a great
anything
question.
that
I
you
love that
really
question.
just said, oh, my goodness.
Yes, but not on the ball field. Not on the ball field. you know, you write nonfiction. When you write nonfiction, you have to tell the truth. You have to tell the truth. This is sort
It's
of a
tricky that way,
requirement. Yeah, you can't make stuff up, which is why I've written 62 now, because we've been here long enough. It's now 62 novels and 1 biography. Now we're up to 63. So in researching what Dot told me, I discovered some funny math in her relationships.
Oh, some overlapping math? Okay.
Yes, and I couldn't unknow that once I knew it. So yes, there was a little bit of fuzzy math. I call it fuzzy math. You know, Dot had always told me that her anniversary with Ricky was October 25th, and that they'd gotten to know each other by driving to Chicago for a bowling tournament that Dot was going to compete in. That's the story she told me all my 12 years with Dot. That's what she told me over and over and over, and their anniversary date and all of that. And I also knew that she told me that her friends were not always that happy about how quickly she and Ricky got together after her partner at the time had died of breast cancer. Okay, Roar, another really interesting story we need to write about. Roar died at 39 from breast cancer. And then Dot and Ricky got together, right? Got on this trip to Chicago, except that's not quite how it happened when you actually looked at the dates and the facts and put them together. And it took me 10 years to find out by putting different pieces that she told me at different times and something she told my wife Cheryl at a different time. We put all of that together and it's like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't. Oh, Dot. Oh, Dot. Really?
Well,
And for that reason, I was very nervous about sharing the book with Dot. Dot didn't want to see the book at first. She said, you know, I trust you. I said, Dot, you can proofread it ahead of time. I won't, you know, you can have a say. No, I trust you. I don't want it. And then as I started looking into these dates, I thought, Dot, do you really trust me? How much do you really trust me? Because I'm going to tell the whole truth.
you got, I mean, well, that's the
tell the whole
challenge when
truth.
you become close with the people you're writing about, is you've still gotta go where you gotta go
I did.
and tell what you gotta tell.
And in the end, as you know, I did decide to share it with her and she loved it. But the one thing she said to me was, well, everybody's going to know everything now. Aren't they? I said, well, yes, they really are.
Well, we're at the top of the hour nearly. Got a couple of minutes left. Time for concluding remarks or anything you'd like to talk about the 64th book or the 654th book?
Well, we'll ask the classic, like, what are you working on now?
My next project, I've been sort of torn on my next project. I'm going back to fiction
All right.
because I can make stuff up.
You gotta take a break every once in a while.
Because I can make stuff up. But this is a very mainstream story that I think is very pertinent and necessary right now. I always try to teach people something or make people talk about something that really matters. Whatever it is I'm writing, whatever genre it's in, it has to matter and has to have a takeaway, a lesson, something in there for people to know. And so I'm exploring a relationship, a present day relationship with somebody from this character's past who served an absolutely essential role, but who is a person of color. And what the present day character doesn't know, is appalled that she doesn't know about that person who she loved with all her heart. And she realizes as an adult, she never knew anything about her, really. And examining, that little bit of self-examination. Why didn't I ask the questions? Why didn't I know? What did I feel guilty about not knowing. So, and it's sort of the present day character's search for self and understanding of whatever is internalized racism or not, whatever it was, and going back to try to heal all that and really find out what that relationship was and who that person was that she thought she knew, but she didn't really know at all.
I love it. And just to sum up, everybody here, I'm sure you will all buy the book, and everybody out there, this is not just This is not just a book for sports fans. This is not just a book for fans of women's softball. This is not just a book for members of the LGBTQ community. This is a book for people who want to see themselves in the writing and in an inspirational setting. It speaks to everybody. Her story really carries people through. So thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you,
Thank
Malaprop.
you.
It was an honor to tell that story.